This is not a drill." The words echoed through the command center, sending a wave of urgency through the room. "A hostile human warship has been detected in our sector, unidentified, heavily armed, and heading straight for us. This is a first, a true test of everything we've built. High-tech scanners, state-of-the-art AI, everything our defense systems rely on has confirmed it. We're under threat." But what does it mean? Is it an act of war? Or is this something far more dangerous? An invitation to chaos? In the next few minutes, we'll uncover what's really happening, why this threat is unlike any we've seen before, and what steps we have to take to survive. Buckle up. This might be the last warning we ever get. The world had never seen anything like this. For centuries, space was our playground. Vast, silent, empty, and cold. But now, the silence had been shattered. An unknown warship, not from any known faction, had appeared out of nowhere. Its trajectory, straight for us. What did we have to stop it? Everything we had, and then some. The tech that now stood between us and total annihilation wasn't just advanced, it was next generation. Cutting edge, to be exact. Developed over decades, it was the product of alliances, secretive labs, and uncountable hours of human ingenuity. The first line of defense, quantum resonance scanners. A technology so advanced, it could track objects through the void of space, even if they were cloaked. These scanners weren't just radar. They were quantum-level sensors, mapping the very resonance frequencies of every object in the sector, no matter how well hidden. The human warship had tried to mask itself using conventional stealth technology, but this wasn't just any scanner. It could peer through layers of electromagnetic noise, bouncing waves off the smallest energy signatures, catching whispers in the vast silence of space. For years, we had relied on this system to predict natural phenomena, asteroids, satellites, comets. But this was different. This wasn't a comet. This wasn't just another routine blip on the radar. It was alive, a true predator in the dark expanse of space. In the operations center, every technician, every officer, stared at their monitors with wide-eyed disbelief. The AI system, the backbone of our defense grid, had already flagged the signature. "Hostile detected" flashed in bold red letters on every screen. The warship had activated a cloaking field, but the system's AI was too fast, too efficient. Its complex algorithms, continuously analyzing and adapting to new threats, instantly recognized the anomaly. No time was wasted in hesitation. No time was wasted in doubt. But here's the most unsettling part. We weren't supposed to see this warship. The AI system wasn't just a static program. It learned. It evolved. It anticipated. Built into it was the core principle of prevention, stopping a war before it started, catching threats early, and neutralizing them in their infancy. But in this case, the detection was just the beginning. No one had planned for what would happen next. The scanners had captured the warship's signature. Its stealth technology, once thought to be perfect, was bypassed. And yet, even as we processed the information, there were still so many unknowns. The AI began running its predictive algorithms, analyzing every possibility. Was this ship a rogue faction? A political strike? Or worse, was this part of a larger, coordinated attack? For the first time in decades, the AI couldn't find a clear answer. The warship wasn't registered in any known databases, not under any known alliance, not even on a radar sweep of every neighboring sector. It was an outlier, and that made it infinitely more dangerous. This technology, designed to prevent war by detecting threats early, had now become the last lifeline between us and total annihilation. The AI's predictive model calculated the trajectory of the warship's path, straight through our core territories. No diplomatic route had been established with this faction, and all communication channels were eerily silent. As the data streamed in, the urgency of the situation escalated. The tech wasn't just about detection, it was about decoding. The AI began analyzing the warship's behavior, its movement patterns, propulsion signatures, energy emissions. A machine of war, yes, but one that had come out of nowhere. The quantum scanners fed the AI real-time data, analyzing the ship's power grid, weapon systems, and even the fluctuations in its energy signature. The ship wasn't just an enemy, it was a mystery, a puzzle that would either get us all killed or help us uncover a war we never saw coming. And with each new calculation, each new discovery, the question that hung in the air grew heavier. Why are they here? This wasn't just about detection anymore. It was about survival. The technology we had in place was our only hope to understand what was coming for us. The AI, once a tool of convenience, had become a weapon, not of destruction, but of knowledge. The truth is, without this technology, without our quantum resonance scanners and the AI's rapid response, we would have been blind. We wouldn't have seen the warship coming. We wouldn't have had a chance. And when the first shots were fired, it would have been too late. But now, the clock was ticking. The room went dead silent. Everyone was staring at the same screens, unable to fully comprehend what they were seeing. The warship, our threat, was unlike anything we'd ever faced. At first, the AI had struggled to make sense of its signature. Now, it was clear. This wasn't some ragtag fleet from a distant faction. This was a precision-crafted weapon, a harbinger of destruction, and the only thing more dangerous than its power was its mysterious origin. No one had seen this kind of warship design before. It wasn't even on any military records. The hull was sleek, almost organic in design, as if it had grown rather than been built. Its surface shimmered like liquid metal, reflecting the cold expanse of space. But there was something more. It was designed to hide. Every surface, every edge, honed to deflect light and radar, leaving no clear signature. This wasn't just advanced technology. This was something alien, something more sophisticated than anything our own forces could muster. The size alone was enough to make your blood run cold. It was nearly twice the size of the largest warships in our fleet, and far more heavily armed. Its weapon systems? Not just laser cannons and missile silos, like we had expected. The warship was equipped with graviton beams, capable of manipulating space itself. It could crush entire fleets by collapsing gravity around them. A single shot could turn a ship into debris before anyone even had time to react. The energy signature it emitted was beyond anything the AI had encountered, bending even the most sophisticated sensors trying to map its movements. But that wasn't what terrified us most. No, it was the silence. For all its firepower, the warship didn't announce its presence with an overt act of aggression. It didn't fire first. It didn't launch a massive attack. It simply appeared. Its intentions were wrapped in a shroud of uncertainty, a looming shadow over our sector, but it hadn't made a move. Not yet. Why? Was this a calculated move? A show of force? A diplomatic demand? Or was this just the first wave of something far darker? A harbinger of war, intent on eradicating anything in its path? The AI couldn't answer that. It had analyzed the patterns of the ship's movement, its energy spikes, its weapon alignment, and yet it still had no answers. The unknowns were vast. The crew by now was on edge. The sensors had picked up the warship's advance. It wasn't just moving closer. It was strategically positioning itself, as if setting up for something. The closer it got, the more erratic the readings became. A complete disruption of every system around us. Communication channels were jammed. Our satellite network was being overridden. It wasn't a simple attack. This wasn't the behavior of a faction-seeking war. It was the behavior of something calculated, patient, and unpredictable. The question lingered like a poison in the air. What did it want? The warship wasn't broadcasting any messages, and our attempts to send signals went unanswered. Was it just waiting? To trap us into a reaction? Or was this a precursor to a far larger offensive? The lack of direct aggression suggested that it wasn't a frontal assault, at least not yet. But it also meant that everything we knew about military strategy was being turned upside down. We were left with only one option: prepare for the worst. Even if this was a diplomatic mission gone wrong, the sheer firepower of the warship meant that any attempt at negotiation could easily escalate into a bloodbath. Could this be the last remnants of a shattered empire? A rogue faction? A desperate plea for resources? Or was it something more sinister, an invitation to a war we never saw coming? The uncertainty was suffocating. The more the AI analyzed the warship's systems, the less we understood. The deeper it dug, the more it became clear that there were no simple answers. It wasn't just a matter of whether we could outgun the warship. It wasn't about brute force. This was about surviving a threat that didn't fit any known strategy. No one knew its goal, its reasoning, or its final play. Was this an ambush waiting to happen? Was it a weapon of pure destruction, intent on obliterating everything in its path? Or was this something else entirely? An alien intelligence, unbound by the rules of human diplomacy and warfare, intent on reshaping the galaxy in ways we couldn't fathom. As the minutes passed, the tension in the room grew heavier. The crew remained locked in their seats, eyes glued to their terminals, searching for answers that didn't seem to exist. And still, the warship pressed on, closer and closer. No messages, no demands, only the silent promise of what was to come. The room was thick with tension. Every crew member, from the seasoned captain to the youngest technician, was frozen in place, eyes wide with uncertainty. The warship was closing in, its massive frame now visible on every screen. The AI had done everything it could, analyzing, calculating, predicting, but even it had reached a dead end. The options were growing slimmer by the second, and every choice seemed to carry the weight of life or death. How could they act? What was the right move? The first question was simple. Evade? For a moment, it seemed like the only logical option. The captain's voice was steady as she spoke, though the tension in her tone betrayed the conflict bubbling underneath. Pull us back. We can retreat into the asteroid field. We've done it before. It'll give us a few minutes to recalibrate. The idea was sound. The asteroid field would hide them, disrupt the enemy's targeting systems, and give them a chance to regroup. But it was a risk. The warship was not only massive but precisely engineered. It had to have the ability to follow them, to track them, no matter where they hid. The AI had already calculated the maneuverability of the ship. It would take a perfect trajectory to avoid detection long enough to escape. And in space, even the smallest misstep would result in a catastrophic failure. Retreat could work, but it could also be the move that got them all killed. Then there was the second possibility: confront. Do we fight? The first officer's voice cut through the silence. The question was met with a chorus of uncertain glances. The warship was far more powerful, far more advanced. They could send everything they had at it. Laser cannons, plasma bursts, drones. But there was no guarantee they would even make a dent. And if the warship was as invincible as it seemed, the retaliation could be swift and brutal. The crew had seen the sheer firepower of this ship, the destructive power it could unleash in seconds. It wasn't just another threat. It was a cataclysm in waiting. The weapons it carried weren't meant for a small skirmish. They were meant to annihilate. "We can't win this fight," the chief engineer muttered, eyes glued to the diagnostic screen. He was right. Even if they managed to land a few hits, the warship's cloaking and gravity-based weapons made their own attack strategies nearly useless. The technology gap was staggering. The crew would be crushed before they had a chance to retaliate. Confrontation was suicide. So what were they left with? Diplomacy? It was a delicate thought, one that echoed through the minds of many. Could they find a peaceful solution? Could they negotiate their way out of this? The captain's gaze drifted to the communications officer, who was frantically trying to re-establish contact with the warship. But there had been no response. Silence. Nothing but the cold void of space. The communication channels were dead. It was as if the warship were waiting for them to make the first move, or perhaps it was simply showing its superiority. There would be no talks, no compromises. In the background, the AI had started to map out the final option. It wasn't a choice anyone wanted to face. It wasn't a choice anyone could face, but it was the last card they had left to play. If they couldn't escape, if they couldn't fight, and if diplomacy wasn't even on the table, they'd have to sacrifice whatever they had left in a desperate attempt to survive. "Send out a distress signal," the captain said, almost as a whisper. "Prepare for evacuation." The words hung in the air like a dark omen. Evacuation. It meant abandoning everything, their mission, their station, their families. The crew's eyes darkened, but no one disagreed. They knew the truth. There was no winning this. The warship was too strong. The only thing left was survival. But survival at what cost? As the AI recalculated their position, adjusting their trajectory to avoid direct confrontation, the uncertainty seemed to choke the life out of the room. They had tried everything. Now they were left with one haunting question. Would they make it out alive? Every second that passed brought them closer to the enemy, closer to the moment when the decision would no longer matter. Would they make it in time? The captain exhaled sharply. The distress signal was live. Their only hope was a miracle. Or perhaps someone, some force, had to be watching over them. In the midst of all the calculations, there was a quiet realization. They had no control anymore, and so they waited. Time was running out. The warship was no longer just a distant threat. It was looming, its shadow stretching across the sector like a storm about to break. The crew's every move was calculated now, every second counting. They could feel it in the air, a tension so thick it seemed to pulse, suffocating them. Could they survive this? It was a question no one dared to voice aloud, but it haunted every corner of the room. The AI, for all its brilliance, couldn't answer the question of whether they'd make it. It could calculate trajectories, predict enemy movements, and analyze weapon systems, but it couldn't predict fate. The first close call came when the warship activated a gravity destabilization field. A ripple, subtle at first, and then the ship shook violently. Crew members stumbled as the entire vessel was subjected to a jolt of energy, like the hand of something far beyond their comprehension reaching out to squeeze them. The ship's systems flickered, lights dimmed, and for a terrifying moment, they were plunged into darkness. The hum of the engines, once steady and comforting, faltered. "Get the power back!" The captain's voice was cold, but beneath the command, there was a tremor, a flicker of fear. The engineers scrambled, working faster than they ever had, their hands moving over consoles with urgency, but the AI was already on it. The gravitational distortion was too much, overwhelming their shields. For a heartbeat, they were vulnerable, sitting ducks in the black expanse of space, and for that heartbeat, no one dared to breathe. Then, as quickly as it came, the power returned. The systems hummed back to life, and the gravity field dissipated. But the damage was done. The crew had seen what the warship was capable of. It wasn't just a question of brute force. It was about control, the ability to render their systems useless, to play with them like a predator, toying with prey. "Status report!" the captain barked, eyes wide with barely contained fury. "We're still holding," the lead engineer replied, his voice tight. "But we won't last long. The warship has already breached our shields once. If it hits us again, it won't." The captain's voice was firm, almost defiant. But even she couldn't disguise the tremor in her hands as she clenched the edge of the command console. They had one option left. A distress signal had gone out, but their chances of a rescue were growing slimmer by the minute. Who could come in time? It wasn't just about sending a call for help anymore. The warship was close, too close. The AI processed every possible scenario, every potential rescue operation. But every time it returned with an answer, the situation grew worse. The warship's energy readings were spiking. Its weapons were now fully armed, charged, and ready to fire. And just when they thought it couldn't get worse, the communications officer's voice cracked through the tension, like glass breaking. "We've lost contact with the outer relay stations. All signals are being jammed. It's the warship. Its systems are overwhelming ours." The silence that followed was absolute. They were alone. The crew's faces turned pale. Panic crept in, seeping into the edges of every thought. How had it come to this? They were supposed to be prepared. Their technology, their systems, everything was supposed to keep them safe. Yet now, they were at the mercy of something far greater. The AI could no longer predict what would happen next. It could only react. And what was coming wasn't anything it had ever calculated. "Engage evasive maneuvers," the captain ordered, her voice clipped, trying to mask the growing fear in her chest. The ship jolted again, this time harder. The warship had fired, a graviton pulse. The blast wasn't meant to destroy, it was meant to disorient. The entire crew felt the effects instantly, as though their bodies were being twisted and pulled by an invisible force. Their internal sensors went haywire. The entire ship lurched sideways, and alarms blared as the crew scrambled to regain control. "We're going off course!" the navigation officer shouted. "Get us back on track!" The captain's voice was a razor edge now, cutting through the chaos. "I need options, now!" But there were no easy options. The warship was everywhere, in their systems, in their heads, pulling at their sanity. Every move they made was being watched. Every attempt to escape met with resistance. And then came the second shock. The AI pinged an alert on every screen, and for the briefest moment, the room fell silent in shock. The warship was broadcasting a signal, but it wasn't a demand. It wasn't a message of any kind. It was a countdown. The message was clear. It would strike in 15 minutes. The crew froze. Time was now against them. They had mere moments to make a choice. Escape was no longer an option. There was no hiding now. They had been outmatched, outclassed, and now the warship was offering them only one thing: destruction. "Get us out of here now." The captain's voice was barely a whisper, her eyes locking with the rest of the crew. "Or we all die." The decision was final. The countdown had begun. The countdown had begun, and in those final moments, time itself seemed to stretch and bend. There was no more room for hesitation. The crew was no longer debating. There was no longer a strategy or a clever escape plan. It was a simple truth that hung in the air like an impending storm. Survival was the only objective left. The warship was relentless. It was an unstoppable force of nature, closing in with a terrifying inevitability. Every sensor, every display on the ship screamed danger. Yet in those moments, all the crew could do was hold their breath. The captain stood rigid, her hands tightly gripping the armrests of her command chair, eyes locked on the countdown timer that ticked away with merciless precision. 13 minutes left. The crew was still scrambling, doing everything they could to regain control, but each attempt felt futile. Every move they made to escape was thwarted by the warship's technology. It was as though the universe had tilted on its axis, and they were caught in the wake of something far beyond their understanding. They had been fighting against time, against technology, against fate itself, and now that fight was reaching its tragic climax. The AI, once a beacon of hope and knowledge, had gone silent. It was overwhelmed, consumed by the sheer scale of the warship's power. There were no calculations left to make, no more solutions to find. "Prepare for impact," the captain whispered, her voice almost lost in the chaotic hum of the ship's failing systems. Her words were final, as though they had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. They had done everything they could. Now, it was all in the hands of the universe. 10 minutes. A cold sweat broke out across the captain's brow. The decision had been made. They had no more time to play the waiting game. They had no more chances for diplomacy, no more hopes for survival through sheer willpower. They were facing something that would change everything, something that might not even be human. The ship lurched again as another blast from the warship struck. This time, the impact was far worse. Sparks flew from the consoles and the lights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the faces of the crew. They braced themselves for the inevitable, but the warship wasn't just attacking now. It was sending a clear message. Resistance was futile. 5 minutes. Each second felt like an eternity. Each breath a struggle to hold back the rising flood of panic. The crew looked at each other, some of them with fear, others with grim resignation. And still, the captain stood, her posture unwavering, her resolve ironclad. She had seen countless battles, countless threats, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for this. "Is there anything more we can do?" The communications officer's voice cracked through the tension, his face pale with anxiety. For a brief moment, the captain's eyes softened, as if she was reaching for the words that would somehow ease the fear that was consuming them all. But then, the truth settled in. Nothing they did would change the outcome. The warship's countdown continued. It wasn't a warning. It was an execution. 1 minute. And then, the ship stopped shaking. The alarms faded. For a split second, it seemed like everything had come to an eerie halt. The crew froze, unsure whether the calm was a gift or a prelude to something even worse. The ship had made its move. The enemy had taken its first strike. And now, was this it? A final, desperate message from the AI blinked across the captain's console, but it was too late. There was no time left to process it. The message had said one thing, loud and clear. The warship is no longer just an invader. It is the beginning of something much larger. The screen went black.